Number 1.
Smutness Murders legend is a Maine legend based on a murder mystery that occurred on an island named Smuttynose, or Smuttynose, at the time of the murders. Smutness Island is an island at the Isles of Shoals in Maine and New Hampshire. The Smutness Murders occurred on March 6, 1873. A double murder that took place on Smutness Island. According to the legend, there were two victims, both were Norwegian immigrants. Their names were Anith Madia and Karen Christensen. The murderer, Louis Wagner, was a German fisherman who worked on the Isles of Shoals for a few years and knew the islands well. After he ended his work on the islands, he returned to the mainland of New Hampshire. After some time he returned to the island in a rowboat from Portsmouth Harbor. Louis rowed the boat there to rob the house on Smutness Island. During the robbery he killed the Norwegian residents. In 1875, Louis Wagner was convicted of the murders despite his attempts at proving his innocence without a solid alibi and was hanged for the murders. Since the hanging of Louis Wagner, other possibilities have emerged of who may have killed the Christensens. The house on Smutness Island, where the two ladies were murdered, is no longer on the island. It was destroyed by ocean storms. The map below has a marker of where the house once stood. Celia Thaxter was a resident of Star Island at the time of the Smutness murders. She was an author and poet. Celia wrote the following about the murders: "We all have been here a week, Carl and I, but such things have happened I feel as if it were years. You know, I suppose, from the newspapers, of the horrid murder at Smuttynose. Those dear, lovely Norwegian people had a set lament over there. There was John Hontvid and his wife Marie, and Karen Christensen, Marie's sister, and Ivan Christensen her brother, and Anith his wife. The two had been married but a year and only came from Norway last fall. Anith, everybody says, was a regular fair beauty, young and strong, with splendid thick yellow hair, so long she could sit on it. Both husbands, John and Ivan, were devotedly fond of their wives, and their little home was so bright and happy and neat and delightful they never ceased congratulating themselves upon having found such a place to live in. Louis Wagner, the Prussian devil who murdered them, had lived with them all summer, but was in Portsmouth working at nothing in particular for the last month." Those 1 to Elizabeth D. Pierce. Shoals, March 11, 1873. He should destroy himself. Anith, his precise little wife, was so lovely. Oscar was so impressed with her beauty. We begged her to come over as often as she could. It was such a pleasure to look at her. You can imagine how shocked and solemnized we have all been. Oscar walks up and down, now ejaculating, "Oh poor, poor things, and Anith so beautiful, so beautiful." Karen was quite one of the family here. It was she of whom I wrote the little spinning ballad, you know. Now I am afraid these dear people will all go frightened away from here, and no more will come. Wednesday, March 12th.
Number 2.
New Englanders may be fascinated with murder stories, but not all of the region's famous mysteries deal exclusively with death. Some, as it turns out, concern near death. This story, one of New England's most unusual unsolved mysteries, came to us courtesy of Yankees editor-in-chief, Judson Hale, who recounted the fascinating tale in his 1982 book, Inside New England. It's not possible to freeze old people in the beginning of winter, store them outside, almost naked, and then thaw them out in time to help with the spring planting. Is it? Well, in 1939, Dr. Temple S. Fay of Philadelphia, who had done some experiments freezing human organs, gave a talk in Providence, Rhode Island, in which he related a grotesque story he believed to be true. He said it occurred just outside Montpelier, Vermont, around 1900. Dr. Fay quoted the talk from an old diary kept by his late Uncle Williams, who visited a remote community outside Montpelier one January 7 and found all the community's old people lying on the floor of a cabin, drugged into unconsciousness. The diary goes on to describe how, during that evening, the drugged people were stripped of all clothing except a single garment, carried outside into the bitter cold air, and placed on logs. And the full moon, occasionally obscured by flying clouds, shone on their upturned ghastly faces, and a horrible fascination kept me by the bodies as long as I could endure the severe cold, the man wrote. Soon the noses, ears, and fingers began to turn white, then the limbs and faces assumed a tallow look. I could stand the cold no longer and went inside, where I found the friends in cheerful conversation. In about an hour I went out and looked at the bodies. They were fast freezing. The next day the bodies were covered with straw, placed in layers in a huge wooden enclosure to protect them from animals, and left there. The diary relates that, when the writer returned to the community the following May, all the frozen old people were brought inside and placed in tubs of warm water with hemlock boughs until they revived, after which they went about their business rather refreshed by their long sleep of 4 months. I once asked an old Vermont farm couple in the Montpelier area if either one of them truly believed the frozen death story. "Certainly do," the husband answered emphatically, without hesitation. Then his wife added, "The only part I doubt is the thawing out." More than 30 years after Hale wrote those words, the mystery surrounding what exactly happened that winter in Montpelier remains.
Number 3.
Authorities say new information on a 1991 cold case murder has provided fresh clues that may lead to the culprits behind the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, reports Bob Ward for Boston 25 News. The 1990 theft was the biggest art heist in modern history. On the night of March 18, 2 thieves dressed as policemen walked into the poorly secured Boston Museum after midnight. After duct taping 2 hapless security guards, the men escaped with 13 paintings valued today at some $500 million, including priceless works by Rembrandt van Rijn and Johannes Vermeer. Over the years, investigators have established several likely suspects that may have been involved in the crime. Yet despite a Netflix television series, a hit investigative podcast from the Globe and WBUR, and a $10 million reward promised by the FBI, the location of the stolen paintings themselves remains a mystery. The FBI said it believed the artwork was moved through organized crime circles to Philadelphia, where the trail went cold around 2003, reported Shelley Murphy of the Boston Globe last fall. Now authorities might be one step closer to solving it. Anthony M.u.r.d.e.r.s, chief of security for the Gardner Museum, tells Boston 25 News that a recent tipster prompted officials to take another look at the murder of career criminal Jimmy Marks, a known career criminal, because the killing may have possible links to the heist. On a February evening 11 months after the heist, Marks was gunned down while unlocking the front door to his apartment in the Boston suburb of Lynn, Massachusetts. The killer had unscrewed the light bulb over the door to ensure that the victim wouldn't see what was coming, making Marks the victim of a classic mob-style hit, reports Boston 25 News. The assailant shot Marks twice in the back of the head and fled the scene. The crime remains unsolved. According to the tip M.u.r.d.e.r.s received, just days before he died, Marks was reportedly heard bragging about possessing 2 of the stolen paintings and that he had hidden some of the stolen artworks, reports Edmund H. Mahoney for the Boston Herald. What's more, Marks had connections to subjects suspected of being involved in the Gardner Museum heist, Lynn Deputy Police Chief Mark O'Toole tells Shelley Murphy, reporting this month for the Boston Globe. "We don't know what, if any, role he had," O'Toole cautions. "But very likely it was related to his death," the official says. M.u.r.d.e.r.s tells 25 News that Marks was friendly with a fellow mafia man, the late Robert "Bobby" Guarente, who has long been a prime suspect in the heist case, and his family. Guarente and his friend Bobby Donati might have helped to transport some of the stolen paintings from Boston to Connecticut and eventually Philadelphia. Marks spent time in prison for a bank robbery in the 1960s, per the Boston Globe. As a drug dealer with many connections among the Boston criminal elite, Marks also spent a significant amount of time at the home of the Guarentes in Maine, M.u.r.d.e.r.s tells 25 News. Mark's niece, Darlene Finnegan, who was 26 at the time of the murder, tells the Globe that shortly before his death, Marks told her that he had something big coming up and he wasn't sure if he was going to do it. At the time, Finnegan had assumed Marks was referring to selling cocaine. Another connection between Marks and the theft emerged in 2015 when Aline Guarente, Bobby's widow, pointed to a picture of Marks during an interview with investigators and declared that her husband had killed him. Bobby Guarente died in 2004 and Aline died in 2018. She was very emotional when she talked about the fact that he had been killed by her late husband, M.u.r.d.e.r.s, who participated in the interviews, tells Boston 25 News. M.u.r.d.e.r.s brought these findings to the media with the hopes that renewed press attention might yield more clues, he says. Those who might have information about the circumstances of Mark's death or the fate of the Gardner paintings in general can contact the museum's tip line at reward@gardnermuseum.org.